This is Roger Green, host of the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast. This weekend, we are celebrating our third birthday, which was on April 15th, along with our breaking the 150,000 download barrier a week earlier. Today, we're releasing 3 special conversations, each containing one of the interviews we included with this week's episode. Over the weekend, we will release more typical conversational cuts from the main podcast recording session. Before we start, I want to thank the 3 sponsors of our third birthday celebration, Madrigal Pharmaceuticals, Novo, Nordisk, and Inventiva Pharma, along with some of the patient advocacy organizations that have been supporters since we started the podcast, notably included the Global Liver Institute, NASH Knowledge, the Fatty Liver Foundation, and the Fatty Liver Alliance. I'm sure I've forgotten somebody. Please accept my apology. Finally, I want to thank Louise Campbell, our lead surfer, who joined me for all 3 of these interviews, and Stephen Harrison and Jorn Schottenberg, the 2 other lead surfers who didn't join these interviews, but have been with us on the podcast episode and throughout this entire fantastic 3-year journey. This conversation captures the interview that Louise Campbell and I conducted with Frédéric Cren, CEO of Inventiva Pharma. After Frédéric, who had never been on Surfing the NASH Tsunami before, tells our audience a little bit about his path to become the CEO and co-founder of Inventiva, the discussion proceeds to recover the first time that Frédéric and I met in 2019, early in the development of Lanifibranor. And over the course of the interview, Frédéric discusses the reasons he was so confident when we met then, starting with the release of the Phase 2A native trial that showed statistical significance in both NASH endpoints, fibrosis reduction and NAFLD activity score, as well as some secondary diabetes-related endpoints like glycohemoglobin. He references the Phase 3 trial that is up and recruiting in 23 countries right now with 350 patients enrolled and an anticipated complete enrollment by end of year and data by late 2025. He mentions the combination LEGEND trial, which combines Lani with the SGLT2 agent empagliflozin, and the presence in the Phase 3 trial of significant numbers of patients also taking GLP-1 agents as ways to look at how well Lani can function in a multi-drug, multi-disease environment. He discusses Lani's safety profile. He discusses weight gain, which is the one perceived possible negative, and discusses why he does not think it's going to be an issue here, and discusses the ways that Inventiva has collaborated with patient advocates in trial design, recruitment, and other issues. As we wind down the interview, I ask what motivated Inventiva to look at adiponectin and ALT as early markers of efficacy or lack thereof. Frédéric talks about their thinking on that, and notes that 3 years from now, he anticipates that Lani might come to market or at least be close. Each of the interviews in this series provides an opportunity to understand what drives a key player in the evolving community and what they see happening in the future from their vantage point. Listening to these 3 interviews and the conversations that capture the lead surfer dialogue will give you a pretty good flavor of where we've been and where we're going from the vantage points of several different individuals. I'm thrilled to have been part of it. We're here with our third and final interview of the birthday celebration with actually someone who's not been on the podcast before, who we're delighted to have with us, Frédéric Cren, CEO of Inventiva Pharma. Good morning, Frédéric. How are you today?
Frédéric Cren.
Very good. Good morning, Roger.
Thank you for being our sponsor for this event, and thank you for joining us. And Louise is with us as well. Good morning, Louise.
Louise Campbell.
Yes, good afternoon here. Nice, a pleasure to be here again.
One of the interesting things about this podcast, Frédéric, is that we're always in at least 2 parts of the day, and sometimes we have morning, afternoon, and night all at the same time. With that, do us a favor, just take a moment and tell our audience just a little bit about your background and how you came to be in the position you're in right now.
Yeah, right. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Inventiva. It's a company we created 10 years ago. I've done the classical CEO work or experience with that, especially in big pharma in different positions. And then at a certain moment, I just decided it was time for me to try to create a company and provide a drug to patients. And that's how we came to develop Lanifibranor. And now we are close to the finish line and doing a pivotal Phase 3 that hopefully will bring this promising compound to patients.
Very, very exciting. When we first met, I think it was November of 2019, maybe, at AASLD in Boston. I was advising Yasmin Rahimi on some things. At that point in time, you expressed some real confidence that Lanifibranor would come to market and would be different from Ella, which was due to come before, but obviously is not going to come to market in NASH. And it's worked out pretty much the way you said so far, hey?
Yeah, good. So I'm still confident. Of course, I meet with a lot of investigators and the team, and, we know the drug drug works. If you look at the phase 2b data, it was great. It was great on the histology parameters, but also on the metabolic parameters, on the liver enzymes, on, of course, HbA1c. So yes, we have a drug that works with a good tolerability. We just need to conduct this phase 3, get the results, and hopefully we'll be in a position to file and look for accelerated approval.
So what have the last 3 years brought for Lanifibranor? 3 years ago, I mean, you were just at the beginning of the phase 2 process, and you're much further along now. So what is the company and what have you been doing to move the drug forward in the last 3 years?
Yeah, so it's many things, of course. So of course, we build on the success of Native. If you put yourself back in 2020 when the result came out, this was the first oral drug to show that the compound in 6 months was able to resolve NASH, at the same time also to reduce fibrosis, which are, as you know, the two clinical endpoints that are required by FDA and MEA for accelerated or conditional approval. And also we have shown that we were also statistically significant on the composite endpoint, so patients with both NASH resolve and one-stage fibrosis reduction. So really a home run. And on top of that, an asset that showed that it was statistically significant on reducing HbA1c, on more or less normalizing liver enzymes, positive on metabolic profile, etc. So all of things that we've been published since then. And then from there, it's a question of meeting with the FDA, agreeing on the design of the phase 3, get breakthrough therapy designation. Once again, there we were, I think, the third compound at that time to get breakthrough in NASH. And then a lot of work to prepare for this phase 3 that now is up and running. We're present in 23 countries, so it's quite incredible for me that I've been in this adventure for the past 10 years to imagine that today a patient in 23 countries in more than 300 clinical trial sites are in the study, are every day taking their oral drugs. I think it's quite a good accomplishment. And all of that in a period of time with COVID where there was a lot of disorganization, so there's been a lot of heavy lifting. And luckily, this is past us and we're targeting to finish enrollment by the end of the year, which means that we'll have the results, top-line result in the second half of 25. And then, this is the main study. And then in parallel, we're working on a trial with Professor Cusey that I know you know well in patients with type 2 diabetes. This is something we really want to continue to explore because when you look at NASH is competitive, there are several drugs over there with good profile. And certainly something that is unique to us is the fact that we improve insulin sensitivity in patients with type 2 diabetes. And we also have shown that in the phase 2b, patients with pre-diabetes, we stop their progression versus type 2 diabetes. So it's certainly, this insulin sensitivity property, that's something we want to explore and that will differentiate us from competition. And this study with Professor Cusey will help us to do that. The study is fully enrolled and we are looking to publish the result very soon because the target is mid-Q2 of this year. So that's one study that is ongoing, and the other study that we also think will be very promising is a combination study of Lani with SGLT2. So although Lani showed very robust efficacy on NASH resolution, fibrosis, and cardiometabolic markers, I think the combination with an SGLT2 and empagliflozin could show additional benefit. We also have patients under GLP-1 in the main phase 3 study, so also there we'll be able to study the combination of Lani plus GLP-1. So, all of this data in combination will be helpful in the life of Lani once it will be on the market.
So, Frédéric, that's quite a lot. Louise, I've got a couple of questions, but let me turn to you first. What would you like to ask Frédéric about this morning?
For me, it all sounds very exciting, and I think I'd be looking more at the side effect profiles, the tolerability for patients. Were there any particular problems that come across in the different groups, for example, diabetes versus just normal NASH patients? Anything that we could pick out that we could look at targeting for education, for patient support, those sort of areas that keep people on drug that is successfully proven to work for them?
So on the side effect, the Lani is well tolerated. We had a very, very low dropout if you look at the phase 2b, and I think this is also something that I think is remarkable about the drug. It's well tolerated. We had some cases of increased weight gain, which is explained due to the mechanism of action where we improve, as I mentioned, insulin sensitivity, and this comes with a mechanism that is well known with PPAR gamma, which is a shift from the visceral fat to the adipose tissue, so from pro-inflammatory visceral fat to less inflammatory fat in the adipose adipose tissue. This is something we've communicated on, and I think we have shown some data that was really, I think, very well received, is the fact that when you look at patients that gain weight with Lani, this comes with improvement in the metabolic profile. So patient will have an improvement in HDL, triglyceride, blood pressure, adiponectin, proBNP, etc. And when you look at patients on placebo that gain weight, it's all the contrary. All of that goes on the wrong direction, and that's explainable because it's a weight gain due to a wrong lifestyle or not enough sport or too much eating the wrong food. And this is totally different with Lani. So it's really this good weight notion, which is well understood by doctors, especially diabetologists, because they know about this consequence, for example, of insulin. And it's something we continue to educate. And it's also one of the reasons why I think this combination trial with SGLT2 or the data we'll be able to generate with GLP-1, I think will help show that if you add an SGLT2 or a GLP-1, you manage to control the potential weight gain you have with Lani. Louise, you mentioned education. This is something very important, and we are involved in working with patient association. This is really very important, and they do a tremendous work because they are able to communicate with patients, and we are able to, when possible, to include the feedback from patients. For example, we recently opened a website for the patients that are in the phase 3, and this has been done with the patient association that provided us with the feedback on our patient would look at this website. We have recently improved our design of the phase 3 by taking into account the FDA feedback and how the FDA sees the optimal way to get approval. And when you look at the trial, we think the modification now make the trial more patient appealing. So we have reduced the number of biopsy from 3 to 2. We have reduced the consent from 7 years. So before, a patient had to give its approval for a 7-year trial. So that's certainly quite an engagement. And now it's 72 weeks. So yes, when we can, we really try to work as much as possible with patient association because, they do a tremendous job. And at the end of the day, what motivates us and I know motivates Inventiva is, to provide a drug that will improve the life of these patients.
So, Frédéric, I guess I have two more questions this morning. First, one of the things we find ourselves talking about from time to time on the podcast, including in one of our interviews yesterday, is the idea that payers might not be comfortable having to wait 12 to 18 months to see a one-level reduction in fibrosis in 25 to 30% of patients to see whether the drug is working. That might not sound like a good bargain, particularly in the U.S. where patients turn over frequently. Stephen Harrison talked last fall on an episode of this podcast, and we talked with Michael Corman last fall about some of the work you've been doing with adiponectin and ALT to sort out more quickly whether patients are succeeding or not. I'm wondering what motivated you to take a look at that issue and whether you are happy with what you're learning so far.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. So if you take, for example, the result from resmetirom, in their phase 3, more or less, they have a 20% responder. So you have 8 patients out of 10 that need an additional treatment or another treatment, and that could cause a problem with payers. So yes, we ask ourselves the same question. We are more on the 40% of responder, but that still means that 6 would potentially need a different treatment or to be treated for a longer period of time than what we have measured so far. And that's why we did all this analysis. And there we're lucky because when you look at the drug and you look at if you have a patient and you take a blood sample and after, let's say, 6 months of treatment, you see it's adiponectin increasing, you see it's ALT, AST, GGT that are normalized. You look at HbA1c, you see that it drops. You have all of these easy markers that indicate that the drug is responding. And so, the probability that it's naturally resolved and it's driving down the fibrosis and the fibrosis improvement, it's quite high. So yeah, we're working on this easy biomarker to try to be able to identify patients that are potentially likely to respond to Lanifibranor. That would be great for the doctors and then also for the payers.
And of course the patients. Yeah. You make a great point that there are so many different metabolic markers that should all be going in the same direction here, that there are lots of ways to look at it. That's a unique benefit of having PPARs compared to some of the more specifically targeted drugs. The other question, I guess, is so Stephen on the main interviews said he was going to be controversial, that he thought that in 3 years there would only be 2 medications approved at that point in time, maybe even 1, but resmetirom and maybe OCA. Do you think you'll make it in 3 years?
It's just about there because we plan to, so as I said, Lanifibranor targeting the end of the phase 3 recruitment towards the second half of this year. Then it's 18 months treatment, so we'll have the data in the second half of 25. So, the time to file and get approval will be somewhere in 2026. So we're around the 3 years mentioned by Steve. So I think Steve is positive on our drug. We work with him. I would include Lani as a drug that would make it to the finish line.
So with that, let me thank you for your 15 minutes this morning. This has been a fantastic conversation. I look forward to seeing you in Vienna at the end of June. Frédéric, this has been fantastic. Thanks again for sponsoring. I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Bye-bye.
And now, back to Roger.
We hope you've enjoyed this recording. If you have any questions or comments about the content of this interview or the entire episode, please put them in the review section of the page from which you downloaded this conversation, or send an email to questions@surfingnash.com. This weekend, we will be releasing 5 more conversations that represent the body of the actual episode that Stephen, Jorn, Louise, and I conducted, and we released to you folks on Wednesday night. Next week, we will be joined by the French endocrinologist Cyril Cossy, who will be talking about the interplay between endocrinology and hepatology, both in research and in clinical care pathways in France. It promises to be a fascinating conversation. So until then, stay safe, surf on. We'll see you on the podcast. Bye-bye now.